Thank you for watching. My name is Glen Morgan. This is We the Governed, and today this is just kind of a quick little short video, but it drew my attention, as it probably did yours as well, as the conflict on the federal Supreme Court. I don't usually talk about them, but sometimes these conflicts trickle down to places like where I live in Washington State, and they mean quite a bit. And it's the big fight between Justice Barrett and Justice Jackson, with essentially this dispute that where most people widely recognize that Justice Barrett used some pretty strong language in eviscerating Justice Jackson's dissent in a recent Supreme Court case, basically saying, listen, Justice Jackson, you're basically ignoring 200 years of history when it comes to the division of power between the Supreme Court and the presidency. And I'm not sure that after that kind of strong language behind the scenes that they're still going to be friends here, but it could be that it's just hyped up and exaggerated, where it's more of an intellectual fight and people have turned it into some kind of a battle of the wills. But it clearly represents two completely different perspectives on the power of government and the role of government in its various branches. And essentially, if you read a lot of the literature that's out there on this and the dissent and the discussion that came out of this, it had to do with this argument of the Imperial Presidency versus the Imperial Judiciary. And I have a little bit of a tweak to this whole argument, because the Imperial Presidency concerns, these have been around actually since almost the founding of the nation. It's been a big concern in the beginning. You had it with concerns over Thomas Jefferson when he was president, and basically between the Barbary Pirates War and getting the Louisiana Purchase and these other things, there were clearly steps that the president made, even from early days like this in our nation's history, where people were concerned that whoever was in the office of the presidency, that they were taking steps that exceeded the constitutional or implied constitutional restrictions on their positions. Then, of course, the concern over the Imperial Judiciary, which is as old as Marbury versus Madison, and of course it raises its head periodically every few generations. The Dred Scott decision in the pre-Civil War era of our country. You had other decisions that have come up periodically over time. And of course, as the years have gone by, the judiciary has become so politicized in the decision-making capacity for the last 100 years in particular, that and their ability to affect our day-to-day lives, that rolling back that Imperial Judiciary from this role that it seems to have, where it's dictating everybody's lives based on the decisions that it makes, even if it's overruling the choices that people have when they elect people to office. However, I'm going to argue that neither one of these is my primary concern with the abuse of power in our country, but really it's more about the imperial bureaucracy. You can read plenty of articles about concerns about the imperial presidency and the imperial judiciary. I'll link to some of those down below. They've gone back for decades and centuries in the case of the imperial presidency in particular. But the imperial bureaucracy is a relatively new thing, and this is when people say, they may use terms like the deep state or something else like this. Reagan, basically, when he ran for president, ran on the platform about the scariest words in the English language were, "I'm from the government, I'm here to help you." Well, the reason why this kind of raises its head again recently is with the Doge Washington efforts in our state, and modeled in some ways on the Doge efforts back in the federal level. You see massive amounts of just wasteful spending and unbelievable bloat, bureaucratic incompetence and deception and dishonesty and out of control waste everywhere you look. And yet, there's a massive infrastructure that's set up to prevent us from correcting or fixing those problems. And that's more than the judiciary, and that's certainly more than the presidency. To Trump's credit, he's one of the few presidents in modern times who has even considered really going down this road and actually trying to fix some of these problems, or at least establishing a system that could do that. And yet the pushback from the bureaucracy, and of course those who find themselves politically aligned with the bureaucracy at that time, is you would think it's the end of the world, and they cannot believe that anybody could dare downsize that bureaucracy. We have a big fight in front of us when it comes to those of us who care about liberty and freedom, and those of us who recognize that these guys are part of the problem, and particularly the bureaucrats, this bloated bureaucracy that just morphs into an impossible to downsize and continually expanding blob of government, that's going to be ultimately what we have to rein in. And whether that's the judiciary that steps in to help us, as I believe they did with the Chevron decision, for example, or the president when he comes in and actually is willing to downsize government. We need to make it easier to downsize government, not harder. We need to make it so that it's possible for elections to have consequences. Sometimes that's going to produce dumb and bad ideas, like it probably will in New York City coming up, and as it has in places like Seattle. You can elect really bad, dumb people to political office, and they can do really bad, dumb, stupid things. But at the end of the day, at least you can eventually get them out of office. And when you do, in theory, you can turn around and fix the problems that those bad, dumb politicians just did. But you can't fix that if you have a bureaucracy that is immune to any kind of election. If they just sit there and collect and extract all the life energy via taxes that you have, simply to perpetuate their existence and to grow their empire that they have, their imperial empire, then we have a big problem. So ultimately, many of the things that I've discussed over the years that We the Governed has involved dealing with this imperial bureaucracy. And I think that ultimately is the fight of our times. It blends into some others. It's not only isolated by itself, but it's a big battle, and it's one of the hardest ones I think that we have to fight for those of us who care about liberty and freedom. But if you want to fight, you can't just stick your head in the sand and hope that it's going to go away and disappear on its own, because it won't. This is ultimately something that the only way we're going to fix this. It's not easy. It's not hard. It's not going to be a simple process. It's going to be much harder probably than any of us realize. And it's also a longer term battle. It's a generational battle to really reverse back the destruction and harm that's been caused by allowing this bureaucracy to metastasize into what we see today. So with that, I just want to remind you, I encourage everybody to be active and become activists where you live, because we need a lot of people on this fight. And there's all kinds of battles, both big and small, that go on in the effort to restore freedom to us, we the people, we the governed, because we need to restore that freedom. And these are the guys that are basically standing in our way. But we have to be willing to show up, because, as I tell everybody all the time, the future belongs to those who show up.